Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about the American presidency and whether it's becoming a dynasty. Gentlemen, welcome back to all of you as well. Richard, I want to pick up on a point that Marc was making earlier on about, administrations taking their staff from one presidency to the other. We've often heard in Washington that people who work for the White House, people who work in the administration, inside the Beltway, people, as we've often heard, live in a bubble. They're out of touch with reality. They're divorced from what ordinary Americans experience out there. Isn't that a danger when you have these dynasty presidents, one after the other, coming from the same family, taking the same people with them, that they will forever remain divorced from what ordinary Americans are thinking?
Yeah, well, it's always a danger of being too insulated, whether it be the politicians or whether it even be the media. I teach both political science and journalism at American University, and I say to my students all the time who come from all over the country and even outside of the country, this is not the real world. This is the real world is where you come from, and you're communicating with those people back there in the real world. Don't forget where you came from, and that happens. Sure, it does happen. And whether it's a dynasty or whether it's just another administration, there is a certain Washington bubble that exists here that is very difficult to get people to break through. President Obama right now is saying, "I'm going out and talking among the people because I want to find out what's going on in their minds. I want to tell them that I'm on their side, and I want to talk about the things that they talk about around their kitchen table rather than talk about the things that we talk about in Washington." But I'm not sure. I think that's endemic to the system, and I'm not sure it has anything to do with dynasties. But the fact that we just regenerate the same group of bureaucrats,
right,
and the same group of leaders, then you get into that kind of a problem. Sure.
But on the level of candidates, I think the American political system is very good at testing people. And we've seen that in the last election when Mitt Romney ran, and I think it was his major problem, that he was considered as an insider, also a member of a dynasty. And we've seen it with the current discussion on Hillary Clinton right now, that the major point where she has to defend herself is if she's coming from humble upbringings or not, or if she's rich or not. So I think there is a huge attention on that issue, and I think it's not that easy on the level of the candidates to get through this and get elected.
Yeah,
easily.
I think you're right. The test that everybody has to go through. There is no anointment.
Okay, one moment, Frank. I'll come to you. I'll come to you in a moment.
Yeah,
go ahead.
There is a test. The electoral system is a test, and there is no anointment. George W. Bush had to run, and if Jeb Bush runs, he's going to have to run. Hillary Clinton's going to have to run. They have to defend their records. They have to defend their past. There's a test there. So I'm not sure that we don't just say, well, okay, it's yours.
All right, Frank, your turn now. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting discussion, but it's the reality of every administration. I really don't think this is relevant to dynasty. What is relevant, however, from passing the baton from one presidency to the other, especially if it's the same family, in the interweaving of the same people, is the stigma that passes from one administration to the other. For instance, if Jeb Bush is going to be, he's not officially a candidate, if he decides to be a candidate, he's going to have to be dealing with the stigma, especially George W. Bush's catastrophe with respect to the announcement in Iraq, the condition for the invasion of Iraq based upon weapons of mass destruction, and which was furthered by Colin Powell, and we understand what happened. That is a problem with one family connecting with the other. We've got the stigma, and it's not such a positive element, and might not be helpful for Jeb Bush. And then we're talking about now with respect to Hillary Clinton. Now, this is a different animal. She is just a step down from a Secretary of State role. She is going to be subject to the stigma of her own Secretary of State administration. She has issues. I think she was well known to have traveled the world to try to make it a better place, to try to work with different countries, but had made serious, catastrophical errors. We're talking about what happened in Benghazi, and then in respect in Libya, where she is still difficult for her to defend the killing of the American ambassador and not effectively protecting them. This is going to carry over into this campaign. And finally, her activities as the wife of a president, also as a senator, are going to carry through, and it's going to be a bit of a problem for her to have to defend. And that is, she makes statements. For instance, it's important for the United States to call China on human rights violations because it makes them respect us. Now, these type of statements, you think, well, she can't be that naive to know that China is just scoffing at our comments. If we go back, looking at how the world views the United States, whenever it does point its fingers at human rights violations and other things, the United States, has skeletons in its closet that needs to be dealt with. And so there's this whole element of hypocrisy of the American government, and our systematic support of dictators such as Pinochet and so forth, doesn't really allow for the United States to be able to really criticize other countries of human rights violations. These statements she's made before she became Secretary of State, and her activities are going to carry over into this campaign. It's not going to be so easy.
Okay, Frank. Marc, I'm going to go to you. Even in the Bush clan, there is some skepticism of whether another Bush should run. I want you to listen to something that Barbara Bush, who's the matriarch of the Bush family, the mother of George W. Bush, the wife, of course, of George H.W. Bush. This is what she said, and she was asked in this instance, is there room for another Bush in the White House? Let's watch.
I think this is a great American country, great country. And if we can't find more than 2 or 3 families to run for high office, that's silly, because there are great governors and great eligible people to run. And I think that the Kennedys, Clintons, Bushes, they're just more families than that.
She's got a point there, hasn't she, Marc?
Well, I think the question is how you read that.
Right.
And I think...
She did change her mind when Jeb Bush's name was announced.
But I think those dynasties are very good in putting the family in place and trying to sell the family. And in this case, the Barbara Bush explicitly said that she didn't think it's a good idea that Jeb ran as a 3rd Bush for the White House. I think now, in hindsight, you can see she didn't want to push him in there. Now, the party establishment is calling for Jeb, and it looks much nicer from her side. So I don't know what she really meant with that. I think it was a clever way to let Jeb Bush be the candidate who's called by the party. It's much better than if she said that would be a good idea. What else should she say?
I want to ask you very quickly. I mean, you work with Der Spiegel. It's a huge magazine in Germany. It's very influential. How do Germans view this, young Germans especially? I mean, when they see a Bush or a Clinton, do they see it as essentially, do they care in the first place, or do they see it as undemocratic, America at it again?
Totally they care. I mean, they care whoever is president of the United States, and obviously they care about those names. But I think in Germany, we don't have an honest discussion about dynasties. In Germany, we have a huge problem with any Bush, whoever that is, even if it's, I mean, it's just, as Frank said, obviously he has the stigma, or any Bush is going to have the stigma of George W. Bush's presidency. On the other hand, they would love to see a Clinton back in the White House. And I think you have good dynasties and bad dynasties. It's very simple. You have, in the German views, you have every Republican dynasty is problematic, and every Democratic dynasty is a good one. I mean, we had never took an issue with the Kennedys. I would love to see a Kennedy back. We would love to have Caroline Kennedy running for the Senate. Well, and obviously everybody would be happy about it.
That's like a fairy tale story, isn't it, the Kennedys? Richard, you're going to get the last word. What is the likelihood that we're going to see another Clinton or a Bush in the White House?
I think it's good. I think that the likelihood is good. The chances are that, barring any health problems, I think Hillary Clinton is going to run. She's obviously kept. If she's got a health problem at this point, she should say so, because she's keeping the rest of the Democrats from gearing up for campaigning. So the Democrats seem to have acquiesced to her already. With regard to the Bush will be a little bit more competitive, mainly because of the fact that He has his brother's record that's going to be a burden for him. He'll have to run on his own record, but he'll have to also carry the burden of his brother's record. And like I said, we don't anoint our presidents, we do elect them, and we have to test them out.
Okay, gentlemen, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Richard Benedetto, Frank Romano, and Marc Hujer, thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat.